In 2014, BuzzFeed published an article, 18 Short Story Writers on Why They Decided to Write a Novel, a collection of personal anecdotes from short story writers on their personal experience in transitioning between the short story and the novel. While most of the writers had positive things to say about their transition, one notable writer was a little against the movement, one Stephen Graham Jones, quoted in saying, "Anyway, the whole starting with stories, ending with novels thing, it's probably too ingrained in the industry and psych to change it. Though I do wish people would stop seeing a hot story from some upstart and start saying to themselves they're just lucky, let's see what they can do with the novel. We don't put poets under this kind of pressure to go from lyric to epic. Maybe we should treat short story writers more like bands or artists we hear on the radio, with this week's top off the charts song. If they could do 50 more of those, then maybe we could go all Beatles crazy for it. If not, if they're just a flash in the pan, then thank them for whatever new DNA they're injecting into the medium and change the station when the song's through. However, this imperative, it doesn't hold film, does it? With film, the short film, this is a practice for the show, it seems. It's just how the industry's built, as near I can tell. Fiction's different, though. Short stories and novels, they're different as well, and they often take different people to write them. If only we could, as a readership, as an audience, remember that and allow short story writers to be short story writers and novelists to be novelists, and stop pressuring one to be the other. This line of thinking comes in deep contrast to the writing industry at large. In a famous interview, George R. R. Martin stated the importance of short fiction to his novel writing, stating often that it made him a better writer when he started with short fiction rather than the novels he is known for now. His bibliography showcases this. A long expanse of Martin's career started not with a 600-page novel about dragons, but short stories. And he considered this to be a healthier route for young writers, advising that they start in short fiction and gradually work their way to novels, which he claimed were harder and more unwieldy to write. Whether or not Martin's statement holds true for every writer is debatable, but the lines between short fiction authors and the novelist are no less subject to intrigue. Modern authors like Martin, Neil Gaiman, and Margaret Atwood stress the importance of short-form fiction and poetry, but many young authors still dive into novels on their first attempt at serious writing. Some even end up published for their efforts. So, what kind of truth holds in Martin's adage? Do young authors need short fiction to become better writers? Do novels have strengths for the new writer that the short fiction does not? Some quick definitions first, because even though a short story and a novel are of similar merit, they are different kinds of fiction. Traditional publishing markets define the novel as a work of fiction that is 40,000 words or more, with many novels falling under the or more line of thinking, though most modern novels trend around 80 to 90,000 words at most. Short stories are harder to pin down. Most technical definitions put them between 1,000 to 7,000 words, but some publishers and magazines lengthen this up to 15,000 words, usually reserved for the novella. You might notice that the trend in length, novels being shorter and shorter particularly, falls in line with the idea that shorter fiction in general is better. My own experience in fiction started with a novel, which I finished and published in 2018, with some years of fan fiction in the background. But even with that experience in mind, I could not help but wonder if I had gone about my writing incorrectly. I had never really enjoyed short fiction, but I wondered if some time with craft, as per Martin's adage, would have made me a better writer. The evolution of the modern definitions, their constraints, and their contextual importance on the world of fiction can feel a bit baffling and overwhelming, as I've mentioned. So, to help explain the two kinds of fiction better, their strengths, their weaknesses, and how they affect each other, I decided to bring in Dr. Joshua Grasso, a PhD in literature and language, as well as an author of both fantasy novels and short fiction, to discuss his own experience in the field. So I want you to tell us a little bit about your experience in the field and yourself, and especially what kind of writing you have done.
Okay. Well, let's see. I've been writing a very long time now. I've been doing the academic writing that I primarily do, obviously since undergraduate. but I've written all kinds of academic writing, from obviously book reviews, biographical essays, critical essays, and that's mostly what I publish as a scholar. So most of what I do as a scholar is more kind of informative, geared towards undergraduates, trying to help them understand the literature that they're going to be reading in the classroom, right? And of course, in a more casual way, I've written, novels, I've written short stories, and things like that. So I think I've tried everything at least once. I went through a period where I wrote plays a lot. I worked for a theater company, and most of it hasn't totally panned out. But yeah, I've had an experience writing a little bit of everything. Yeah, definitely.
And you'd say that experiencing a little bit of everything in writing is good?
I want to say yes, but I'm actually not sure that's true anymore. I think the danger of being a jack of all trades is that writing in any form, as you know, takes a real discipline. It takes a lot of experience, and you have to really get into the skin of that field. So I think the danger of people who spread themselves too far is they never really learn how to write for any one form. They're kind of like, they write novels that are kind of like screenplays, right? Or they write short stories that are really like kind of novels. And I've seen that a lot. And I think in a way it's great to get the experience, but sometimes I think you should almost just really focus on one form.
So the James Patterson form of writing doesn't
Well, he doesn't
doesn't
write them anyway, so I don't think he would know either.
that's very true, actually. But you write, you do write fiction, and obviously since you've written both fiction and like short fiction and novels, you've learned some things from both. Do you prefer one to the other now, given your experience?
I still like novels better because in a novel you can be more meandering. You can just kind of you can make things up as you go, and then you can go back and fix it. But a novel doesn't have to hang together in a way so carefully. A novel can be more discursive. You just can't do that in a short story. In a short story, everything has to be going somewhere. In fact, when you write a short story, you could probably delete half of it and make it even shorter. I keep realizing that. It's fun, it's challenging, but it's really frustrating.
I understand completely, having written both short stories and fiction,
Right.
fiction, because long form fiction, and in some ways I prefer short form fiction because it's easier to finish, it's easier to construct on a short period. But novels are more rewarding sometimes too. Given that, though, have you learned anything differently from the novel than you have from your short stories?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think short stories have taught me. How can I say this? Short stories have taught me frankly, how to revise better. Because again, like recently, I was looking at a short story I wrote several months ago that was about 26 pages, and I wanted to submit it to some place that wanted a 4,000 maximum word story. It had to be between 2 and 4,000. My story was 8,000. So I'm like, well, it's just too long. But I looked at it and I'm like, most of this doesn't need to be here. I mean, I like it there. It's fun, right? I mean, in a novel, it would all be there. But I realized, I could take most of this out. And I revised it and I got it down to just over 4,000 words, like 4,500. And you just realize how much you don't need to really tell a story. Whereas a novel really pushes you, I think a novel pushes you not to be concise, but to really chase multiple rabbits. It's because I mean, what's fun about a novel is that you can explore this world. You can go all these different places. Whereas a story, it's like, just tell us this and be done with it.
And the novels have gotten shorter, I've noticed, especially in the last 10, 20 years, as opposed to, and I work in a bookstore, I see all of the last, 40, 50 years of fiction that aren't remembered. They're longer. They're a lot longer. What do you make of that? That the novel's growing a little closer to not the short story necessarily, but the novella.
Oh, well, it's. I mean, I think it's totally technology and Twitter and everything. I mean, people have a harder time sitting down with a book for 6 hours. I mean, if you really love it, you will, but most people don't want to sit down and read for that long. So I think people want a skimmable book more and more. So the books are getting shorter. And like if you're a Stephen King or a Martin or someone, you can get away with it because people really want to get sink into that world.
To that end, do you think that has benefited short fiction, like short stories, or does it hurt them?
I think in a way, in a way, it's cool to really ask yourself, am I being concise? Because sometimes you don't want a wordy short story that's pretending that looks like a chapter from a novel, right? And I totally get that. But we're pushing more and more towards like flash fiction, which is so much fun to write and really, really, really hard to write. But the danger is, I think too many people, that's becoming the norm. Like anything that's longer than flash fiction, a lot of times people are like, well, why are we reading this? And I worry that to be concise is an art. Not everyone can do it, but not every story needs to be that concise. Some stories need to be 5,000, 6,000, 8,000 words long. They just do. And you have to really ask yourself, does it need to be that long? That's true. But I don't think that every story by definition needs to be 1,000 words long or shorter, right? But that's how it's becoming now.
Indeed, the role modern society's reading habits play into how fiction is consumed, and more importantly, how authors become better authors, is a curious thought, particularly when paired with Martin's statements about short fiction. But, as he was an author since the 70s, surely he wasn't just subject to short attention spans and needed to build up an audience to gain attention, right? With Game of Thrones soon ending its long reign, one can't help but wonder how books like Martin's change the landscape of fiction as well. Longer books are returning to vogue in places, but those places may only be for established authors. Experience is important, hence the argument that many authors make to young writers. Start with short stories, go from there. But perhaps this isn't a recipe for success. And the industry's fixation with length might be a response to audiences' lower retention rates. As recently as this year, George R. Martin himself admitted that A Song of Ice and Fire was planned as a short story, as per his skills at the time, but became a series naturally, as some books just do. So perhaps Stephen Graham Jones makes a point about an outdated mindset. Short stories aren't worse than novels, they're just different. Novelists aren't missing something because they haven't written short fiction, they simply acquired a different skill set, different writing for different kinds of authors, and both admirable in their own way. Good fiction, after all, is good fiction. Whether it be the 600-word flash fiction, or the aforementioned 600-page novel about dragons.